Hello there. Welcome back, if you are back. Today we're going to look at a poem by Elizabeth Bishop. Um, but before that, I thought I might say a word about my method, such as it is. It's pretty simple to state. I begin by selecting a poem. That's that's step one. Um, and it might be a poem that I've known for years. Like Skunk Hour was the first one of these I did. A High-Toned Old Christian by Robert Lowell. That's a Robert Lowell poem. A High-Toned Old Christian Woman by Wallace Stevens. Proof Rock by T.S. Eliot. That was the last one. These are poems I've been known and have been reading for years. In some cases, though, some of these have been brand new to me. The Louise Gluck poem, A Sharply Worded Silence, was brand new to me. Um, the Adrienne Rich poem about Shataya, it's not brand new. I've come to know that poem over the last couple of years. So it can be something I've known for a long time. It can be brand new. It can be anything in between. I do not read any criticism of the poem before I make my remarks about them here. It's just me and the poem. I think in one or two cases I've mentioned a critic or two that I might have been reading about something else, and there was some idea in that critic's writing that I thought that struck me as a useful way of looking at least some aspect of a poem. So I've done that, but I'm not swatting up on criticism of a particular poem before I do it. I'm trying to have just my own response to it. Now that's going to be informed by all the reading that I've done, and it's a fair amount over the last 40 odd years. But there won't be nothing that I'm doing right before. And I'm not suggesting that anyone not read literary criticism. On the contrary, I think there are and have been brilliant critics and brilliant prose stylists also, and they're definitely worth reading. The really nice prose stylists are from a previous generation. I think some of the theory that has entered literary scholarship and criticism over the past 30, 40 years, while a lot of it is valuable, I'm not a Derrida hater or anything like that. But I think one casualty of that influence on literary criticism is that the kind of belletristic sort of style that some earlier critics had kind of fell by the wayside because language itself has been such an object of interest. In a way, I mean, it always has been, of course, but in a way that it hadn't been before, and lots of our habitual ways of speaking come under some kind of interrogation, and there are people are striving for new ways to say things that don't seem to involve assumptions that we no longer hold or celebrate in various ways. But there's still a lot to learn. That isn't to suggest that these earlier critics are not worth reading. I love reading Lionel Trilling. All those guys, Kermode, Cleanth Brooks, any of the Southern fugitives, Robert Penn Warren. He also, of course, was a poet and novelist. Did I mention Cleanth Brooks? I think I did. T.S. Eliot, for all of his all the things about him and his outlook that there may be to take exception to. So not in any way trying to discourage that, but I just sort of like the one reader's mind and the poet's mind, and trying to connect with that person through this poem. It's almost like a quasi religious experience for me, and I just very much like to do that. So, and as to my method, they're not reading the criticism. There's also no AI involved here at all. Um, you know, any mistakes are mine, and I don't think I could live with myself if I thought that some error that I made were going to be blamed on an innocent large language model. Okay, so we're talking about Elizabeth Bishop, a great mid-century poet, um, very close to Robert Lowell. They were very close friends. I don't think it was ever romantic with them, but they were very, very close friends. Spent a lot of time together. She was born in 1911. She died in 1979, and she published fairly little for such a major poet who was writing over some decades. There are about 100 poems from her that appeared, which isn't a ton, really. She was known to be quite meticulous about her poems. I think most poets are pretty meticulous, but I think even by that standard, she was very meticulous. She was known to have held on to them, not concerned about getting them out there, by any deadlines or with any on any sort of timetable necessarily. She reworked them, revised them, chiseled them, tweaked them, pushed them around, and so forth until she got them exactly as she wanted them. And whether that's the way to describe it or not. I mean, I think it was Auden said that. I think it was that a poem is never finished; it's only abandoned at some point. So whether she really got it to the point where she said, "Okay, chef's kiss. This is it. I'm ready to let it out into the world," or she just reached some final stage of resignation and fatigue and couldn't do more with it. I don't really know, but in any case, she took her time and she really worked them over. So the poem we're going to look at today is called Night City. It's from her book Geography 3, which appeared in 1976, I believe. And these poems, I think, were written over by the series of copyright years that are in here. I think they were all written and appeared in various places over the first half of the decade of the 70s. There's all kinds of great things in here. Maybe her best known poem is in here, and that's called One Art, and it's a villanelle. We looked at a villanelle earlier. One of these, I think Dylan Thomas's "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night" is a villanelle, and that was a strict villanelle. She takes some liberties with it, some really interesting liberties with it. I considered doing that one, but in the end, I opted for this one called Night City, which I will read now. Night City, subtitle From the Plane, Plane, airplane. No foot could endure it. Shoes are too thin. Broken glass, broken bottles, heaps of them burn. Over those fires no one could walk, those flaring acids and variegated bloods. The city burns tears. A gathered lake of aquamarine begins to smoke. The city burns guilt. For guilt disposal, the central heat must be this intense. Diaphanous lymph, bright turgid blood, spatter outward in clots of gold to where run, molten, in the dark environs green and luminous silicate rivers. A pool of bitumen one tycoon wept by himself, a blackened moon. Another cried a skyscraper up. Look, incandescent, its wires drip. The conflagration fights for air in a dread vacuum. The sky is dead. Still, there are creatures, careful ones, overhead. They set down their feet. They walk green, red, green, red. And that last stanza that begins, "Still there are creatures," is, unlike all the others, is set between parentheses, which I'll say more about. What could be more fascinating than a set of parentheses? Okay, so let's get into it by talking about this is probably going to be kind of, the form and the content are probably going to be kind of tangled up in what I say, but I'll start kind of just with an overview of the form here. We have 10 stanzas of 4 lines each. All the stanzas are roughly comparable in length. That is, not only in the number of lines, but in the number of words and in line length. And together, they form this sequence or kind of mosaic, maybe, of stark and terrifying visual impressions that are made upon the speaker of the poem, the person who's looking down at this city, this unidentified city, from an airplane. Most of these impressions or images are self-contained in that in the sense that they isolate a singular, appalling feature of this blighted scene in a sharp image. Though there's one interesting exception to that tendency, one suggestive, I think, instance in which one stanza flows into another through the use of enjambment. And maybe I'll talk about the enjambment now, and show how it's situated in the poem, so as to, I think, I might cast some light on the whole, and by drawing a contrast with the other stanzas that are end stopped versus being enjambed. So often, with the use of enjambment, you can perceive or experience, really, a struggle that's taking place between order, you might say, represented by the structure of the stanzas, and disorder, represented by the substantive concerns of the poem, its subject, whose verbal embodiment in the language of the poem overruns the stanzas, bursts their borders, you might say, spills or leaks out of them into those that follow. This poem presents a fairly symmetrical visual order in order to your eye. There's 10 stanzas, as I said, 4 lines each, even numbers and everything. And the line lengths are all very close to being the same. So it presents an order and a symmetry to your eye that is denied at times to your ear, at least sometimes, I think definitely at one time. It's an order that is to some degree at least subverted by what your ear encounters. And it creates this kind of tension between order and symmetry on the one hand, and on the other, an energy or force within the poem, driven by its subject, by the dictates of what the poet is trying to say or show you or make you think about, that disrupts it. So your eye perceives this defined scope, or perhaps a border that's created by the compass of the stanza, and you see that border violated, overrun by the matter, by the unruly reality that we're being given an account of. So now that's not happening all over the place in this poem, just suggestively, I think, in one specific place. The enjambment between stanzas 5 and 6, I think, carries that suggestion of a reality that's being described that's too wild and wayward for the coherent structure of the stanzas. It depicts this destructive force that's on the move, an active process, not contained or not adequately contained or controlled, that's spilling over. So I'll read the stanzas 5 and 6 so you can see. Diaphanous lymph, bright turgid blood, spatter outward in clots of gold. Next stanza, to where run, molten, in the dark environs, green and luminous, silicate rivers. So these what are characterized, these tropes of that are drawn from biology, lymph, human, and it's going to be human biology here, the human body, lymph, blood, you've got it spattering in clots of gold and running molten in the dark environments. You get this sense of it on the move, and the first of those two stanzas end in clots of gold, two, and then the next one begins to where run. So it's the same sentence, and it's broken into those two kinds of containers. One can't contain this perceived this instance, what's being described here. It has to spill into the other one, and we're talking about spilling. So she's kind of helping you to experience that, underlying and giving a certain kind of energy and motion to what she's describing. So, and this comes after these other stanzas, like the first one: "No foot could endure it. Shoes are too thin. Broken glass, broken bottles, heaps of them burn." That's pretty self-contained. And the next one: "Over those fires no one could walk. Those flaring acids and variegated bloods." Period. So you've got these assertions, these kind of matter-of-fact descriptions. In a way, matter-of-fact. In another way, there's a lot of imaginative energy in a lot of this too. But they're kind of stated kind of bluntly, kind of declaratively, just kind of as assertions, one after the other, and they're kind of stark. They're kind of they're vivid, and they make this impression, and they kind of hit you. They don't. I wouldn't say that it flows. It's more, I might say, violent. It kind of these things kind of strike you. The city burns tears. A gathered lake of aquamarine begins to smoke. The city burns guilt. For guilt disposal, the central heat must be this intense. And then you get the two enjambed stanzas. And then we're back to more of what you got in the first four stanzas, these more self-contained, kind of isolated, discrete perceptions that are stated as kind of assertions or stated declaratively. And then ending in, and I'll get to that last stanza. But I think so. Okay, so she's in an airplane. I'm saying she because I just think that the odds are pretty good that Elizabeth Bishop was flying somewhere and she looked out and she saw this and she wrote a poem about it. So I'm going to say she, even though the gender of the speaker isn't noted. She's in an airplane and she's looking down on this city. And I think the fact that she calls it Night City, I think it's inevitable that you're going to kind of think about cities kind of in the abstract, or what they're for, what they do, what they represent to our best selves, and also or in their highest ideal, I guess, and how they shape up for us in lived reality. The word city is in that poem, and what she's seeing seems to be equated with city. It's possible she's looking at one specific part of it, but I'll get to that in a second. So a city is made to, of course, accommodate human life, make it more livable, more materially secure, and deliver to those living within its confines something of the benefit of collective life or community. In its ideal, I suppose it's a collective project that is both a generator of material well-being and an incubator of culture. The reality on the ground, so to speak, of any city of any size, of course, diverges from that benign conception to some extent. Cities have problems of various kinds, most of them stemming from socioeconomic factors or the aggression or antagonism that seems to be, at least so far, an ineradicable part of human nature, or humans as they've developed. So what makes an impression upon this air traveler who's speaking here as she's looking down on this city diverges very far from that ideal, to say the least. She seems to be surveying a baleful scene that she describes in very lurid terms. And I found myself puzzling a bit over what the speaker of the poem is seeing exactly. Really, what could be seen through the window of a plane in the air like that. And first, I wondered if she was just seeing the normal spill of lights that a city presents to the eye when you're flying over it at night, um, sort of from the highest plateau of the flight altitude. Maybe not necessarily the very highest, but anyway, at any rate, seeing more or less the whole of the city as this kind of glittering spectacle. Um, not seeing any particular part of it, and whether a certain feeling of uncanniness, of a kind of fundamentally opaque strangeness that shrouds our existence. There was something about that image or that perspective that seized her imagination and prompted it to transform what she saw into this kind of phantasmagorical hellscape. And I could kind of see that. In daily life, I don't think we necessarily have a top of mind awareness of our earthly habitat as a planet suspended in the howling void of space. But from a plane looking down, it can be hard to escape that sense. Sometimes, and this would be more during the day than at night, you can see the curvature of the earth from a plane, for example. Give you a kind of planetary, awareness. And this can be an awe-striking and disorienting perception. And as that word awe implies, in part, it's a frightening one. So she seems to be contemplating the predatory aggression, the power, and perhaps the ruthlessness of that's needed to create this organism that we call a city. And it seems, of course, anything but benign. On the other side of the coin, I think it part of that strangeness too, or that the way that that's sort of disturbing, is that that spatial perspective on a population center can make even our from this commanding view from far above, can make even our mightiest cities seem small and puny and provisional and all too perishable. Established. They're all established thanks to furious energy and determination, but they can seem to be, from that perspective, only kind of just holding out against their destiny to one day fall. Like what comes to mind is the statue in Ozymandias, the famous legless trunks of stone. I live just outside Chicago, and once in my life, I've been to the top of the John Hancock building, with the observation place they've got up there. People who live in and around the city tend not to do the touristy things, but I've been up there once, and it was during the day, and you look down on the city, and the perspective that's really struck me was how, and of course Illinois is flat as a pancake, and outside the city, and you've got the cluster of buildings that make the Chicago downtown, and then you've got flatness for the rest of the city, and then as far as you can see, and there's something this great and beautiful city, it from that perspective can look like this. The buildings can just look sort of huddled, kind of pathetically against up against the water, and not mighty at all. It can look a little bit almost comical, but it's obviously very different from how you feel when you're walking around it and your buildings are towering over you and so forth and so on. That's our typical experience of it. So this perspective, and a lot of this poem, this is what's going on here, and she does this a lot. She's using physical perspective and to create different states of mind and different levels of awareness about things. So I think that she's what's sort of seizing her, and what's moving her at this moment, the speaker of the poem, is that perhaps she's perceiving civilization itself as this war against the much stronger natural forces that will ultimately defeat it, um, and that the scars and lacerations left on the face of nature in the wake of that conflict on the face of the planet make very plain the savagery and desperation of that struggle that we're doomed to wage in order to sustain these, pathetic little bivouacs that we've erected in a universe that's inhospitable and unforgiving. So, maybe she isn't yet really at the apex of her flight arc, and she is seeing more closely, but still from far enough above to get this commanding and defamiliarizing perspective. She's seeing, um, just a part of it. But whether she's, some industrial district or whatever, because she's perceived, and the reason it struck me was because it's night and she's talking about very, very, very particular small things like broken glass, and I'm not sure that would be visible from any point in one's ascent in a plane or descent in a plane or at any point along the arc of your flight. But which is why I thought maybe there was some imaginative transformation going on here. But anyway, whether she's seeing the entire illuminated footprint of the city or just an exceptionally noxious industrial zone within it, she seems to be identifying that noxiousness and befoulment with the essence of the city itself, and maybe suggesting that this constitutes its net effect, is its true essence. Again, the title of the poem is Night City. So we have this dreadful tableau that disturbs and possibly even overwhelms her, and that again, she seems to be equating with the city as a whole. So it is hard to escape the idea that the most conspicuous and consequential agency of human beings, animated as we are a good bit of the time by the aggressive and competitive logic of the profit motive, is the spread of poison and disfigurement and ruin all around us, far from creating a space for life and the realization of human potential, which is what a city in its ideal form may be said to be. We're fouling the nest and rendering it more and more inhospitable to human life, perversely. But, lest this be seen as a kind of standard issue environmental brief or alarm bell, I think it's deeper than that. It seems to me, and again, not necessarily in a religious sense, that it's spiritual. We might ask ourselves, what is the significance? What deeper train of reflection is set in motion by her tying these environmental depredations to guilt and sorrow? She says, just to revisit those stanzas, the city burns tears, a gathered lake of aquamarine begins to smoke. The city burns guilt, for guilt disposal, the central heat must be this intense. A pool of bitumen, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I think it's bitumen. A pool of bitumen, one tycoon wept by himself, a blackened moon. Another cried a skyscraper up. Look, incandescence, its wires drip. So this tycoon, this pool of bitumen is the tears of the tycoon. And this image of a blackened moon is suggestive of spoliation of nature, I suppose. And the other one cried a skyscraper up, and it's incandescent. Its wires drip, however. The upward motion of the skyscraper is checked or contradicted by the dripping wires, which seem to be equated to tears. So we survey this scarred and blighted landscape with the poem speaker, and I think maybe a way of looking at this is that we as I think I mentioned briefly a little bit ago, We note that she employs tropes of the human body. These industrial discharges are characterized as bloods and lymphs and tears, acids, and acids too can be biological, rather than what they literally are. Um, and this is of course suggestive of we're doing ourselves injury. Um, this rapine that we're engaged in all the time is going to just turn. It was of course just going to turn back on ourselves and hurt us. Um, and their breaking forth from the body is a testament to the violence and spoliation that somehow emerge from our guilt and sorrow. On some level, we're aware of what we're doing, I suppose. And it produces this savage and toxic scarring and scalding and disfigurement of the natural environment and of perhaps, and I think maybe this is getting down to the center of it, perhaps a vital and defining dimension of humanity um, or of the human spirit that seeks a meaningful connection with nature. Something we deny and suppress, and in spite of ourselves and to our detriment, trespass against, and possibly in a very perverse way. Of course, all of this devastation is a kind of sublimation of the guilt and sorrow we carry out of a feeling perhaps of severance from nature or from some kind of wholeness that nature may represent to our minds. I think there's a nice irony in the fact that the speaker of the poem is only able to have this perspective on the city and have these reflections because she's in an airplane, which of course is an artifact of the profit-driven technological progress of humanity. That she's in another sense that as she looks at all this, she's so disturbed and distraught about. Um, uh, Only the dramatic augmenting of human potency by technology gives her this commanding view and this perspective on what we're doing to ourselves. Okay, I think perhaps I've said enough, but I did want to end with I did want to mention this last stanza. The poem does not end with any sort of resounding consummation or flourish at all, but with a little bleat, I think, almost a whisper of tremulous qualification of its overall tendency and mood. The last stanza is between parentheses, and it reads, "Still, there are creatures, careful ones, overhead. They set down their feet. They walk, green, red, green, red." Um, this this note of exception, this little place to which this all this poison and contamination and scalding and scarring hasn't reached, is by being placed in parentheses, it suggests that this is a minor sort of counter. This is a sort of a minor sort of counterweight to the overall tendency, something incidental, maybe a little ray of hope, but far from anything triumphant or anything necessarily optimistic. But there is a little assertion of order there. This is the only stanza in which there is a rhyme. Still there are creatures, careful ones overhead. They set down their feet, they walk, green, red, green, red. Or Freud said order is the compulsion to repeat, and rhyme is a repeat of a vowel sound, or at least. And there's also the repetition green, red, green, red. So that's the only instance of that. It definitely departs from everything that came before it in that sense, and maybe there's just a little bit of note of hope there. The setting down their feet and walking green, red seems to answer the very first line of the poem, No foot could endure it. Shoes are too thin. Broken glass, broken bottles, heaps of them burn. So we go from a vision of a environment that's so inhospitable to human life that people can't even walk on the ground, to creatures, careful ones overhead, who set down their feet, walk green, red, green, red. I don't know what the green, red is necessarily supposed to mean. What I first thought of was traffic lights, and that may be ridiculous. But anyway, traffic lights are there for order and purpose and to enhance safety. And you go when you're supposed to, you stop when you're supposed to. Not sure, but there is that interesting little note at the end that sees some sort of perhaps little shoot of hope amid this otherwise very bleak account of what we've made of ourselves and of the planet we live on. So, okay, with that, I'll read it again. Night City, from the plain. No foot could endure it. Shoes are too thin. Broken glass, broken bottles, heaps of them burn. Over those fires no one could walk, those flaring acids and variegated bloods. The city burns tears. A gathered lake of aquamarine begins to smoke. The city burns guilt. For guilt disposal, the central heat must be this intense. Diaphanous lymph, bright turgid blood, spatter outward in clots of gold to where run, molten, in the dark environs, green and luminous silicate rivers. A pool of bitumen, one tycoon wept by himself, a blackened moon. Another cried a skyscraper up. Look, incandescent, its wires drip. The conflagration fights for air in a dread vacuum. The sky is dead. Still, there are creatures, careful ones, overhead. They set down their feet. They walk green, red, green, red. Okay, read Elizabeth Bishop. You'll thank me for it. Bye.